Hello and welcome to GMT. I'm Philippa Thomas. EU leaders are in Brussels for a summit dominated by the divisive issue of migration. Over the last few weeks, more migrant rescue boats and their mainly African passengers have been barred from entering Italian ports. Frontline countries like Italy want others to take a greater share of migrants. States like Austria are pushing back. Now, this isn't a crisis on the scale of 2015, when thousands of migrants were coming ashore every day on the Greek islands. In the years since then, the numbers have been coming down. So far this year, there's been a total of around 44,000 arrivals. But there are dire warnings from European leaders about what will happen if Europe doesn't act. In the last few hours, Germany's Angela Merkel has said the migration question could decide the future of the EU. Here are James Reynolds in Rome and Bethany Bell in Vienna on the Italian and Austrian positions coming in to this summit.
Italy's got two main aims at the summit. The first is to get the rest of the EU to agree to share out migrants more equally to take the pressure off frontline states like Italy. But this idea is likely to meet resistance from states in Central and Eastern Europe. And Italy's second main aim is to get support for its plan to stop migration across the Mediterranean altogether. It plans to do this by helping to build migration holding centres on the external borders of Libya. There are a number of questions about this, but Italy's Interior Minister Matteo Salvini has told the BBC that he doesn't expect any objections from Europe. We'll see.
Austria's government, a coalition of the Conservatives and the far right, says the migrant crisis of 2015 mustn't happen again. Austria's leader, Sebastian Kurz of the Conservatives, says he's making the fight against illegal migration one of the priorities for Austria's upcoming EU presidency. And he's taking a tough line. He wants to shift the focus from relocating asylum seekers inside the EU to strengthening the EU's outer borders. He wants to set up asylum centres outside the EU and to give the EU's border agency a tougher mandate. During the migrant crisis of 2015 and 16, Austria took in about 1% of its population. But these days, asylum applications have dropped dramatically.
Well, let's cross now to Damian Grammaticus on what is a significant day in Brussels. Damian.
Yes, Philippa, so that issue, migration, is the one that has sort of forced its way to the top of the agenda of the summit here. The leaders, deep divisions to overcome, and particularly important for Germany's Chancellor Angela Merkel, the political problems she faces at home. That's the issue here, the splits within her own coalition. And addressing the German Parliament this morning, she called this a defining issue for the European Union. This is what she said.
Europe faces a lot of challenges, but the migration could be a question of destiny for the European Union. Either we manage it in a way that Africa and other countries believe that we are led by values and that we are based on multilateralism and not on unilateralism, or nobody will believe in our value system that has made us so strong. And this is why all this is at stake.
Angela Merkel, and the question really is whether she will bring back enough to satisfy her coalition partners who want a tougher line. Well, joining me to cast a bit of light on this, Ashley Fox, who's the leader of the Conservative members of the European Parliament.
Good morning.
Here. Morning. On this issue, Angela Merkel, we're hearing this morning, talking about this as an issue of values, a vital one for the future of the European Union. Do you see it that way? Is it really that critical that is the debate right at the heart of the future of the Union?
Well, I'm very glad that the Commission and now the Council has abandoned its top-down policy of mandatory quotas for individual countries. That was never accepted, and the policy hasn't worked.
Well, it was a policy that was agreed by the Council here, and everyone, the Council voted
not agreed by everybody,
but
by
it was by
the barest majority.
Which is the way the Council works. But now, do you think this issue is a threat to the unity of the EU, the way Angela Merkel took it today as a defining issue?
It is perhaps a threat to those that want to see ever closer political union and more Europe for every policy. Because what we've seen is that top-down Europe-wide policy of mandatory quotas does not work. And in order to have an immigration and asylum policy that works, you have to have the active cooperation of all the member states. And that's what's required.
That sort of is a sort of given, you'd think. But what elements can they put in place now, do you think, to satisfy Germany, to satisfy Italy, to satisfy Austria, all with different agendas here?
Well, what we need is a humane and a tough approach. We need to be humane to genuine asylum seekers. We need to process their claims quickly and give them sanctuary, but we need to break the business model of the human traffickers. And then those that are not asylum seekers need to be sent back quickly. And I'm afraid at the moment the Europe-wide policy does not work.
Can I just move on to a particular British issue, Brexit? Yes. The negotiations at the minute stalled, mostly really at the minute because of the issue of the Irish border. And that is critical to resolve that, to get the withdrawal deal. How is Theresa May going to live up to that? She's promised that there will be no border. How is she going to deliver that?
And the EU's promised that as well.
But
and what we require,
it's
promised on both sides. And what we require is flexibility on both sides, because we have a situation where the EU are very good at saying that's not sufficient, or we don't agree with that. But the question the leaders
are asking, and they will ask here again in their conclusions, is to the UK to put something on the table that will deliver that.
We have put something on the table, and the EU have put something on the table. Now, we are not prepared to see a border between Great Britain and Northern Ireland. There will not be a border down the Irish Sea. So we need a bit of imagination, a bit of cooperation. It's all very easy for the EU just to say no to everything the British propose, but if they genuinely want a solution, then they need to be cooperative and they need to be flexible. And I think with a bit of flexibility, we can do a good deal.
Ashley Fox, thank you very much. And of course, the leaders will debate this evening migration and hear from Theresa May on Brexit. So all of those issues coming as they sit down for dinner tonight. Back to you.
Very busy, very crucial. Damien, thank you. Rescue divers in northern Thailand have suspended their search for 12 boys and their football coach who've been trapped in a cave complex since Saturday. International divers have arrived to help, but the Thai Navy has currently given up trying to find a passage through to the deeper caves because of continuing rain and rising water levels. Howard Johnson is outside the cave system. He sent this update.
Search and rescue operations were hampered here this morning at the Tam Luang cave complex in northern Thailand because of heavy rain last night. What we saw was the water table inside the complex rise to its highest level since this emergency began 6 days ago. 13 missing people, 12 school children and their coach. This morning we spoke to the US team that are over here, the search and rescue guys, and they said that they were going over the top of the hill here to look to see if they could find a shaft or a chimney down into one of the chambers where the boys might be. We also saw the British team, a team of divers who left the complex. I asked them for a quote, but they declined to give one. Now this evening we've seen monks praying and giving offerings, hoping that the boys will be returned safely. And we're seeing more rescue teams going in, hoping to find the boys this evening.
The BBC's Howard Johnson reporting from northern Thailand. Some more of our stories in brief now. China's President Xi Jinping has said his country will not give up 1 inch of the territory it controls. But speaking after talks with the US Defense Secretary James Mattis, Mr. Xi insisted his country is committed to peace and has no desire to take territory from other nations. A fire in Kenya has killed at least 15 people and injured more than 70. The blaze swept through one of the biggest open-air markets in the capital, Nairobi. A market popular among second-hand cloth traders. Many were injured while trying to salvage their goods. The US House of Representatives has rejected a compromise proposal to modify America's laws on immigration. President Donald Trump had called on members of Congress to create new legislation after the outcry over the way parents and children were being separated when they crossed the country's southern border. Well, this is a good day for President Trump. He is relishing his chance to change American legal history. He's deciding who to nominate as a new life member of the 9-person U.S. Supreme Court, now that Justice Anthony Kennedy has announced he's retiring. Kennedy was seen as a crucial swing vote between liberal and conservative, often siding with the former on key issues like abortion rights and the legalization of gay marriage in 2015. Jane O'Brien has more.
I'd like again to express our delight with the nomination of Judge Anthony M. Kennedy to be an Associate Justice of the United States Supreme Court.
Anthony Kennedy was a Harvard law professor when he was nominated by Ronald Reagan. 30 years later, President Donald Trump bid him farewell.
I just want to thank Justice Kennedy for the years of tremendous service. He's a very spectacular man, really a spectacular man.
Throughout his decades on the bench, he was a consequential voice, advancing gay rights but limiting abortion rights. A moderate Republican, Kennedy was often the swing vote on contentious issues, sometimes taking a more liberal stance. His departure opens the door for somebody who will appeal to conservatives, a potential shift that alarms Democrats.
This is the most important Supreme Court vacancy for this country in at least a generation.
In his brief letter of resignation, Justice Kennedy said his service on the Supreme Court had been the greatest honour and privilege. His last few weeks were busy. He wrote the ruling that centred on religious freedom in the case of a baker who refused to make a wedding cake for a gay couple.
The bad guy.
And he voted to uphold President Trump's highly contentious travel ban from 5 Muslim-majority countries.
Are you ready, Justice Gorsuch, to take the oath?
With the appointment of Neil Gorsuch, Donald Trump has already fulfilled his campaign pledge. With the resignation of Anthony Kennedy, he has the chance to reshape the Supreme Court.
Well, by nominating another Supreme Court justice, his second pick, President Trump could have an impact that lasts for decades. As we saw in Jane's report, this is the current makeup of the court. But there are 3 of the 9 justices I want to highlight. Anthony Kennedy in the middle, steps down at the end of July. Ruth Bader Ginsburg is 85 years old. Stephen Breyer will be 80 in August. And those 2 were both appointed by Democratic President Bill Clinton. Let's talk now to Daniel Lippman, who's a reporter for Politico, a co-author of the daily newsletter Politico Playbook. Daniel's in Aspen, Colorado, getting up early. Daniel, we really appreciate it. President Trump will want to act fast on this, won't he?
Yeah, he wants to move before the midterm elections, which might see Republicans lose control of the Senate. And they see this as an opportunity to shape the court for a generation. And that Trump has an ability to stamp a conservative imprint on the court, which could have a lot of ramifications on terms of abortion, affirmative action, gay rights, business law. And so this is Democrats' worst nightmare. They wanted Kennedy to hang on for another year in terms of trying to get a more moderate justice if Democrats were in control of the Senate.
There's a big irony here, isn't there? Because I remember President Obama being unable to pick his nomination when there was a vacant seat because Republicans in Congress wouldn't let him.
Yeah, Democrats thought that was a stolen seat, and they don't like how Gorsuch has done on the court. They think he's very conservative, and but this is a midterm election year, and so they really don't have much power in the Senate to get a nominee to their liking. And so, this applies to issues like Roe v. Wade, which legalized abortion across the country. And that could be in serious jeopardy with another pro-life justice. And so that's a real concern for Democrats and women across the country. You could have a patchwork of laws where it's legal to get an abortion in half the states and illegal in the rest.
Yeah, Daniel, I was at the last abortion-related case in the Supreme Court this March, and it was notable that whenever Anthony Kennedy spoke, everyone in the court leaned forward because what he said mattered so much. I just want your thought on the fact that he's not just one of the 9. He was really pivotal.
Yeah, he was appointed by a Republican, yet he was a swing justice, and so usually he was in the majority. His opinion basically made up a lot of the 5-4 opinions, and so you might see a lot of cases where Republicans tried to get the Supreme Court to rule on their side in terms of testing cases and seeing how far they can go with a new justice. And so, but there are a number of moderate Republican senators that have to approve it. It's such a very narrow majority that Republicans can't lose a single vote on this justice. And so they may try to get promises of being more moderate on an issue like abortion.
Daniel, always good to have you with us here on BBC World News. Thanks again. And do stay with us here on BBC World News. Still to come.
I'll be joining you live from Moscow with Germany out of this year's World Cup. We'll be taking a look at some of the other teams hoping to secure a place in the final.
Astana, an architectural dream come true, an international meeting point.
You have to get out in the field and hear people's stories.
I like the way you dance.
Back in the Impact studio, I share those stories with my global audience.
You, Yalda.
I'm Yalda Hakim. Join me on my show Impact on BBC World News.
Take away the noise,
the fury,
the fighting voices, the distortions, cosmetics, the color and the flashy effects, but most of all,
you can take away the lies,
the slander,
the misrepresentation
that seeks to pull us apart. And then
you can find out
what's actually happening.
And when you find that,
then you'll find
BBC News.
All right, take a breath.
That quiet, calm year we wanted, Christian, it's not going to happen, right?
Exactly that.
And there is already full-on drama in the White House.
Long time today, and there were all sorts of rumours circulating.
These links to Russia are what hangs over this presidency.
Jean-Claude Juncker saying today, don't believe that Brexit isn't going to happen. I don't think the UK is going to change its mind.
So interesting. A year of Trump gives us, of course, a lot to discuss.
Beyond 100 days, helping you make sense of it all on BBC World News.
Welcome back to GMT. It was arguably the biggest upset in World Cup history. Germany eliminated after a shock 2-0 loss to South Korea. It's the defending champions' earliest exit from the tournament for 80 years. Well, let's get all the reaction and the latest news from Regini Vaidyanathan in Moscow. Regini.
Well, Philippa, there are exciting and dramatic nights in the World Cup, and then there's last night when defending champions Germany crashed out of the tournament, losing 2-0 to South Korea. Now, I think we can now bring you pictures of the German national team travelling. Many people watching are dying to know what the reaction of German fans is to all of this. Well, I'm very pleased to be joined by We'll get to that in a second. Darius, how are you feeling today?
It's very painful, still trying to digest what happened. Emotional, but the outcome balanced everything, so we were still happy campers. And the game yesterday, yeah.
Lola, you've got your Germany shirt on today. Still proud to wear it?
Definitely.
Even after that performance?
Yeah, we still, with a lot of training, we'll be back.
Anyways, with volunteers.
And you were saying earlier before we came on air, Darius, that you're a bit worried about wearing your shirt today around Moscow.
Yeah, I was walking back from the stadium yesterday and received a hit after the famous 7-1 4 years ago. So, yeah, I had to keep quiet.
Well, thank you for bringing your shirt and your flag with us today. And commiserations. I know there are a lot of people watching this, though, that are celebrating Germany's exit. But for now, we will mourn the team's exit from this World Cup. Thank you so much for joining us. Another busy day of fixtures. Let's just go through the matches that we are looking forward to today. In Group H, Japan play Poland and Senegal take on Colombia. Now, Poland are already out, but the other three teams are fighting to stay in this tournament. Moving over to Group G, well, England, of course, play Belgium. Both of those teams are already through. And Panama play Tunisia. Neither of those teams are going to go through to the final 16. Of course, a lot of anticipation ahead of that England game after their stunning victory at the weekend. Our correspondent Sarah Rainsford is travelling with the England team.
These England fans took the easy route to Russia. A 2-hour charter flight directs to Kaliningrad. It is the westernmost venue for this World Cup.
High five.
The supporters found a warm welcome at the airport, and I found growing confidence in the England team.
Might you follow England if they do well, if they carry on?
Oh, listen, I'm not getting back on that plane. I'm going to escape work and just deal with that, I'm afraid. It'll be too big opportunity. Yeah, I'll stay here till we're out, I think.
And how long might that be, do you reckon?
To the final, of course.
But this match is by a beach on the Baltic, and the fans are making the most of that. The Belgians fully kitted out despite the heat wave, and a California girl who's backing England.
America got kicked out, and I don't know, he makes me follow England, so.
And this time it hasn't been such a bad team to follow, right?
So far so good, yeah. So we'll hopefully the quarterfinals at least. We'll see how it goes there.
Scenes like these aren't what most people imagine when they first think of Russia. But then Kaliningrad, this Russian exclave in the heart of Europe, isn't like anywhere else in the country. Poland's just a 40-minute drive away, so the fans have been pouring in here by coach. That cheaper ride leaves spare cash for beer. England supporters had a timid start to this World Cup. Now it seems the only thing they're hiding from is the sun. Sarah Rainsford, BBC News, Kaliningrad.
Well, many people looking ahead to that game. But last night, another story from the tournament was that Brazil, after a difficult start to this World Cup, are through to the final 16. But back in Brazil, it's not just the football that is being discussed with reference to the World Cup. And to explain this in more detail, I'm joined by BBC Brazil's Ricardo Semra. Ricardo, tell me more about what people are talking about back home.
Yeah, the biggest news story in Brazil at the beginning of the World Cup was not Neymar, was not the Brazilian team, but it was videos filmed by Brazilian fans with Russian women. They asked these Russian women to repeat bad words in Portuguese. Of course, they had no clue of what they were saying. Those videos were shared on WhatsApp, Facebook, and then they were spread everywhere. It was big news over there, and now we've discovered the Russian side of this. Groups formed by nationalists here in Russia. They're gathering more than 2,000, 4,000 men here, and they are offending and exposing Russian women who are portrayed in videos like this.
OK, well, thank you so much, Ricardo, there from BBC Brasilia. Well, that's it for the programme for this half an hour. Thanks for joining us. We'll have more on BBC News in the next half hour.
Hello, thanks for joining me. Time we updated you on the weather prospects for the next few days across the whole of Europe. Still a real contrast in fortunes. Low pressure close by to Iberia, so